You say in literature there are 4 basic voices or tonalities?
Well, 5 if you count your own voice, your natural speaking voice as a writer. So the other 4, there's only 4 other tonalities in all of Western literature. And I have a standing offer to any of my students, if they can comb any piece of writing from Homer to the present and find a page or a paragraph or even one sentence that's not one of those 4, then I will give them, and I have one of those play money says $1 billion, and I hold up the $1 billion bill and I go, if you can find a sentence that's not one of those 4, and I hold up the $1 billion bill, say, I'll give you $1 billion. And so far, no one has collected it. So there's only 4 basic styles or tones or voices, depending on how you want to look at it, in all of Western literature, beside writing in your own tone. And then there's the other 4.
And those other 4 are?
Tommy, Billy, Sarah, and Becky.
Oh, okay. Oh, I know Becky. Yeah, she's good. I like her.
Well, one of them is what I call straight talk. All the names I use come from a poem by another writer. So Nikki Giovanni has a poem called Straight Talk. So I use that, in other words, and these would all be writing in your own voice. I cover that, how to get the voice deep and all that, in my my first book on method writing called Method Writing. And then the 4 voices that you just asked me about, I cover in my second book. It's called Advanced Method Writing. And at the bottom it says, The Art of Tonal Dynamics. So it's how to take these 4 tones and use them the way a composer of music would use different kinds of musical percussion effects and, whatever, because tones change in music. Very deep, and then suddenly it becomes light and so forth. So the 4 tones that I have names for them. Straight talk means you're not in the deep voice. You're very chit-chatty. Everything is, boy, you won't believe what happened last night. I mean, there I am standing on the corner, and would you believe it? A guy comes up, and he's got a cigarette in his nose, and I thought, very chit-chatty. The opposite of the deep voice. The second voice is that writerly, poetic style that a lot of writers use, and that a lot of writers think you're supposed to write like that, where you give metaphors and similes and fancy description and all that kind of stuff. And on a scale of 1 to 10, you could do it in a subtle way, or you could do it in a very extreme way. So, for instance, if you read William Faulkner or Marcel Proust, these are writers who write in a very ornate style, almost at a 10. But then there are other writers who use a little bit of style, but they're only at a 1 or a 2. But it's all not writing in your natural voice. It's a heightened style. Then the third voice is the oldest technique in all of writing. It's where you repeat. It goes to the Bible. It goes all the way back to the Bible, where you repeat things 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So a lot of your great politicians or preachers will use this voice. I have a dream that one day blah, 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 blah. I have a dream that one day blah, 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 blah. I have a dream that one day blah, blah, blah. Nobody remembers the blah, 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 but everybody remembers the I have a dream speech, because by repeating it, he makes that a kind of drumbeat, a rhythmic pulse. So that is the most ancient form of writing. That was how people remembered, because people couldn't read. So even if someone wrote something, they would perform it. The repetition of phrases, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, from Charles Dickens. Or the Bible, there's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to sow, a time to buy and a time, The repetition creates a way to remember, because people couldn't read, so you had to know to remember. So that device, that repetition, is a technique that can be used in more ways than you realize. So when I teach it, First, people have to know how to do it. It's just how to do it. Then you learn many different ways you can use it. There can be subsets of the repetition with different repetitions. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. See, these people around that time, they studied what was called the Greek and Latin revival. And that was one of the things you studied if you went into politics or into religious preaching, was the repetition. You studied that. So Lincoln's Gettysburg Address comes directly from that, where you repeat something. He talks about in the Gettysburg Address, we've come here to dedicate a portion of this field as a final resting place of those who here gave their lives that we may live, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. So we cannot. 237 words, I think, is the Gettysburg Address. If you go through it, you will find 5 or 6 places where Lincoln repeats something like a mantra 3, 4, sometimes 5 times in a row. And he does it at the very end. At the very end. That this nation shall have a new birth of freedom. And something, what is it? Do you remember how he ends his speech? Of the people, by the people, for the people. So that's a repetition. That is a technique that he learned in his studies. So that's the third voice. Then the fourth one is actually not a voice. It's where you use language in a non-communicative way, where you're writing almost stream of consciousness or absurd images, or maybe you've got someone who's got Alzheimer's or someone who's drunk, but it's language that is not used in a normal linear way. And poets and writers have been doing that for at least over 100 years, started in France with Arthur Rimbaud and Baudelaire, and then the Russian futurists were doing it. They created a thing called Zom poetry that didn't make sense and so forth. So any writing that is kind of like modern art, where you have cubism or abstract painting or abstract expressionism, where you're just seeing a lot of crap on the canvas. Well, what would be the analogy of that with words? Well, it would be words and sentences that don't make any sense. In other words, I did a whole book of I called it Absence of Field, because there's no logical field to it. It's all disconnected on the page. So I kind of took that idea, and I have a book called Lucky Finds, in which I put it all on cards. So when you got my book, I'm back. It's called Lucky Finds. So, but actually it's not a book. It's a bunch of cards. And when I teach in the classroom with kids, I lay all this out on the floor, and the kids absolutely love it. I just spread all the cards out on the floor, and they're just, things are this way and that way, and I hand drew those letters that you see there. What is that? There's another one. There's another one. Can you see that on the camera?
A little bit. I'm just curious. What are some of, like, if you chose one? They're different letters. So
yeah, they're hand drawn. I draw them, and sometimes the writing is upside down and sideways. I'll do a different font, but each piece is kind of a. It hangs together in a way, but it's up to the reader to figure it out. Something like that. But when I show this to kids in school, we spread all the cards out on the floor, and then they make their own, and they just love it. They absolutely love it. See, on this one, you got to read it this way, then you got to turn it upside down and read it that way. Here's one where I just have a lot of negative space, and it just says carbon cycle illustrious, and then there's those 2 letters. So, I play with the forms. So it's not just like you're reading a story or a poem. It's all broken up. There. Anyway, there's 52 of them, and it's called Lucky Finds because it's like you come across something on the pavement and you pick it up and go, oh, a quarter. A lucky find.
For a new writer, should they try these different tonalities or personalities, or just stay in the beginning with their authentic voice, and then once they have mastered that, then venture out to these other sort of areas?
Well, you know, as I said, I'm kind of an old athlete, and I learned boxing and swimming and football and basketball and how to play golf. I always noticed that when you're being taught from the ground up. You're being taught basic movements, and then you build on that. For instance, when I was boxing, I spent a long time not being allowed to throw punches. Everything had to be footwork. And I thought, come on, when do I get to punch somebody? But when you learn footwork, you discover that a punch will have as much strength, not as your power here, but in your legs. And if you are balanced when you throw a punch, and if you are transferring the energy from the legs to the body, you get more power. So everything depends on the legs and the stance. Same with tennis. When you're playing tennis, if your feet are too close together or too far apart, you don't have as much balance or power. So one of the things you learn playing tennis is you learn to run to where the ball is and then plant your feet correctly before you swing. Because if your feet are planted correctly, then the swing, if you learn how to do the swing, that would be the next thing. But foundation is very important. So in my first class in method writing, it's all about the voice, how to manipulate the natural voice. And yeah, you practice. We have exercises that you do from week to week, and we work on that. Then when you go to my advanced class, now we work on the 4 voices. And again, you're practicing. And at some point, we have an exercise where you get a pair of dice and you throw the dice, and each number corresponds to one of the concepts you've learned up to this point. So if a number 2 comes up, and let's say it's the fancy schmancy voice, you've got to write 4 lines of fancy schmancy. Then you roll the dice again, and 6 comes up. What is that? Oh, that's straight talk. Where, hey, well, you won't believe what happened. But it's all the same piece. It's all a coherent idea or story, but you're switching every 4 lines. And so everybody thinks, it's not going to make any sense. But it ends up making perfect sense because you're changing tonalities. And it's the change of tonalities that makes for drama more than just the drama in the story. I don't know if you fully get that. The story isn't where the drama is. The drama is in the tonalities that you switch. And great composers, when they write, they don't just write the same note 100 times. They're changing. When Beethoven took my class early on, he had written a symphony and he brought it in, and the opening of the symphony went this way. Da 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 da, 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 da 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 da. I said, Ludwig, it's a little boring. You're doing nothing but the deep voice. Why don't you do like the straight talk voice, where you get high like that? And he said, well, I got to try that. I will do that next week. And then he comes in next week and he did the deep voice, but then he switched to that very light voice. So now when you listen to the Fifth Symphony, it goes da 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 da, da 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 da, ba da da dum, 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 bum ba. Da, 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 da. I go, very good, Ludwig. You're getting the idea of tonal dynamics. You want to switch those tones. So when they do that dice thing, it surprises a lot of them. They go, wow, that really worked. The piece made sense. Those changes in tone didn't give the reader whiplash. It just felt like good writing. And good writing is tonal dynamics. And one of the reasons why a lot of people's stories are boring is because the voice is the same all the way through.